Tea might be the most trusted product in the entire British kitchen. It sits there with almost no suspicion attached to it. A box of tea does not feel like a decision that needs investigation. It feels familiar, modest, almost innocent. That is exactly why this category gets away with so much. Because when most people reach for tea, they are not really buying leaves. They are buying routine, comfort, national habit, childhood memory, and the feeling that a brand this old, this famous, or this polished must have already earned their trust. But the modern tea aisle is full of brands selling much more image than clarity. Britishness without British-grown tea. Premium language without premium specificity. Wellness language without plain honesty. Sustainable-sounding messaging that tells you just enough to feel reassured, but not always enough to actually judge the product. And that is the hidden issue running through this entire category. Tea is sold as one of the simplest things you can buy, while the buying logic around it has become strangely foggy. So this is not a list about claiming every one of these brands is scandalous, dangerous, or secretly toxic. That would be lazy. This is about something more useful. If you care about transparency, ingredient logic, value for money, and whether the branding matches the actual information you're getting, these are 8 UK tea brands I would skip first. Not because they all fail in the same way, but because they each reveal a different weakness in how tea gets sold to ordinary shoppers. Start with PG Tips, because this is where habit becomes a business model all by itself. PG Tips is one of those brands people buy almost on autopilot. It has been around so long that the act of choosing it barely feels like choosing. It feels like default settings. And that is precisely the problem. When a brand becomes that culturally embedded, the pressure to explain itself clearly gets weaker, not stronger. The buyer brings the trust to the shelf before the box has even earned it. Look at how the brand presents itself, and what stands out is not leaf-level detail. It is identity, mood, campaign energy, Britishness, and the emotional ritual around a cup of tea. Even when the brand talks about a more premium blend like PG Tips Gold, what you get is blend language and origin names like Rwandan, Kenyan, and Assam tea, but not the kind of sharp product clarity that would make a careful shopper say, "Yes, now I know exactly why this box deserves my money over the next one." That is the issue. With tea this familiar, vagueness feels normal. And once vagueness feels normal, almost any compromise can hide inside it. Maybe the cup is acceptable. Maybe it is even nostalgic. But acceptable and nostalgic are not the same as transparent. If your daily tea is one of the most repeated purchases in your kitchen, repeating it out of muscle memory is one of the most expensive blind spots you can have. A product you buy every week should become more scrutinized over time, not less. The deeper reason I would skip PG Tips is that it represents a category problem in its purest form. It relies on recognition more than explanation. It is the tea version of a familiar handshake. You think you know what you're getting because you know the name, but the name is not the product. The trust is not the tea. And when a brand's strongest asset is that people stopped asking questions years ago, that is when I start asking more of them. Then there is Tetley, which is a very different kind of skip, because here the issue is not just familiarity. It is the way convenience, processing, and partial sustainability messaging all get bundled together into a product most people still think of as incredibly simple. Tetley's own FAQ gives away more than the front of the box ever does. It says the caffeine content depends on the blend, the origin of the tea, and even the weight of the bag. It explains that its green tea blend comes from China, Kenya, and Argentina. It notes that its decaffeinated teas are processed using ethyl acetate. And it openly says its tea bags are 99% biodegradable, but still contain a very small amount of plastic to keep them closed. That matters, not because every shopper needs a chemistry lecture with breakfast, but because this is what honest tea buying actually looks like once you move past the cozy shelf image. Processing matters, materials matter, blend origin matters, yet in the aisle, tea still gets sold as if none of those details are central to the buying decision. Tetley is useful precisely because it shows how much complexity can sit behind one of the most ordinary boxes in the supermarket. If you are buying decaf, for example, too many people shop as though all decaf tea is basically the same, just with less caffeine. But the method matters to some buyers. If you are buying tea bags, too many people still imagine paper, leaf, water, done. But Tetley's own wording reminds you that even a humble tea bag can involve material compromises that the front panel never dramatizes. It is the kind of detail that should make the buyer pause, not panic. Pause. And that is why I would skip Tetley. Not because it is uniquely terrible. Not because a cup of Tetley is some cinematic disaster. I would skip it because it forces you to confront how much quiet processing and packaging logic is tucked behind a product most people still buy with nursery-level trust. When tea brands ask for that kind of automatic faith, I want the opposite response. I want scrutiny. I want comparison. I want buyers to stop treating the tea aisle like a no-thinking zone. Typhoo comes next, and this one exposes another pattern entirely. The way a brand can flood the shopper with confident tone while staying relatively broad on the thing that should matter most. Go through Typhoo's messaging and you get bold, British, big-hearted, more flavor, more satisfaction, more ooh-oh in every brew. You get identity, you get reassurance, you get lots of language about care, consistency, proper brews, and trusted sourcing from Rainforest Alliance certified growers around the world. You get a British manufacturing identity. You get packaging explanations about removing foil and simplifying materials. What you do not get, at the center of the pitch, is the kind of precise leaf-first explanation that would justify deep confidence in the product itself. And this is where tea branding becomes fascinating, because Typhoo is not really selling mystery. It is selling normality. It wants to feel solid and reasonable, sensible packaging, familiar taste, everyday value. But everyday can become an excuse word in food and drink categories. It lowers the shopper's expectations in just the right places. The buyer starts thinking, it's only tea. It doesn't need to be that detailed. But tea bought every day deserves more detail, not less. There is also a subtle contradiction here that is easy to miss. Typhoo leans heavily on British identity, even while making clear that the tea itself is sourced from growers around the world and manufactured and packed in the UK. Again, that is not a scandal. Tea is not grown in Britain at commercial scale, the way the branding tone often invites you to emotionally imagine it. The problem is not the global sourcing. The problem is how easily national feeling becomes a substitute for product understanding. And when a brand tells you that removing foil does not affect taste, aroma, or quality, that can absolutely be a reasonable packaging decision. But it also reveals how much of the tea category has historically depended on theater. Freshness theater, heritage theater, premium theater. Typhoo strips some of that away, yet still wraps itself in another kind of theater, the emotional confidence of a British household name. I would skip it because it asks to be trusted for being steady, not because it gives the sharpest reasons to trust the tea itself. Twinings is where the conversation gets more sophisticated and more revealing. Because Twinings is not a crude tea brand, it is a highly polished one. It knows how to present heritage, craft, well-being, and global sourcing in a way that feels elevated. On paper, that sounds like exactly what a careful buyer should want. The brand talks about over 300 years of tea making, responsible sourcing, community support, environmental targets, and a global map of where its tea and herbs come from. That is a stronger transparency posture than many brands even attempt. But here is why I would still skip Twinings more often than not. The brand's biggest strength is also its camouflage. It is so refined, so heritage-rich, and so professionally presented that the buyer can mistake corporate storytelling for product intimacy. The language is expansive. The map is reassuring. The history is immaculate. The packaging feels smart. Yet when you get down to actual shopping decisions, a lot of what you are still buying is a polished system of broad confidence, rather than a brutally clear explanation of why this particular blend, in this particular format, is the best use of your money. Twinings is especially good at selling the feeling of discernment. The buyer feels upgraded just by holding the box. That matters in retail more than most people admit. But premium feeling and premium clarity are not the same thing. If a black tea is introduced as a blend of Assam, Ceylon, and Kenyan teas, that may be perfectly true. It may even make a good cup. But a lot of buyers paying Twinings prices are not simply paying for tea quality. They are paying for the emotional architecture around the tea, the crest, the legacy, the tone, the polished reassurance that somebody distinguished has already made the decision for them. And once you notice that, a lot of the category starts to look different. Twinings is not just selling a box of tea bags, it is selling authority without having to sound authoritarian. It is selling confidence through refinement. I would skip it, because this is where the tea aisle can get very expensive without becoming proportionally more honest. Not empty, not fraudulent, just far better at narrating trust than proving value. Pause here, because by now, the pattern should be getting uncomfortable. None of these brands need a dramatic scandal to become weak buys. The tea category's most effective trick is much quieter than that. It teaches shoppers to accept soft focus, a bit of origin, a bit of certification, a bit of tradition, a bit of feel-good language, a bit of packaging reform, a bit of premium styling, and once enough bits are stacked together, the box starts to feel complete, even if the buying case is still strangely thin. That is the moment where smart shoppers lose money. Not when the product looks obviously bad, but when it looks trustworthy enough to stop the questions. Yorkshire tea is one of the best examples of how powerful naming can be. Ask an ordinary shopper what they assume from the words Yorkshire tea, and chances are the answer will not be a technical one. It will be emotional, regional, grounded, strong, familiar, a tea with roots, a tea with place. The brand itself explains that the tea is grown in more than 20 different places across Africa and India, imported to Harrogate and blended there. It also explains that the name comes from the blend being created for the water supply in Yorkshire. That is actually an interesting story. It is not dishonest in the blunt sense, but it is a perfect case study in how naming shapes perception much faster than detail shapes understanding. By the time most shoppers reach the backstory, the front name impression has already done its work. Yorkshire tea sounds local in the way modern buyers increasingly crave. It sounds grounded in a place. It sounds like the opposite of anonymous global commodity tea. Yet the tea itself is, by the brand's own explanation, a multi-origin blend grown elsewhere and named after the place where the blend identity was developed. Again, the issue is not that blending is bad. In tea, blending can be a genuine craft. The issue is the trust effect produced by the name. Place is one of the strongest psychological shortcuts in food and drink. It can instantly create a sense of authenticity, and authenticity is often what buyers are really reaching for when they think they are buying quality. Yorkshire tea understands that deeply. The brand is not merely selling flavor, it is selling belonging. And that is why I would skip it if the goal is clarity over comfort. Because once you strip away the regional warmth, what you still have is a mass-market black tea blend that depends heavily on a very effective emotional frame. Plenty of people love it. That is not the point. The point is that love and scrutiny are not the same thing. If a brand can make millions of people feel like they know where a tea is from without the tea actually being from there, that is not a tiny detail. That is the whole game. Now we move into a different corner of the aisle. And this is where the health halo starts doing the heavy lifting. Pukka is a brand many shoppers reach for when they want their tea to feel cleaner, more thoughtful, more purposeful, maybe even more aligned with a better version of themselves. The packaging is beautiful. The blends are presented with care. The language is full of ingredients, balance, flavor architecture, herbal expertise, and need states. That phrase alone tells you so much. The brand talks about designing recipes by considering what the tea needs to do. This is exactly where consumer caution has to sharpen, because functional language is powerful. It turns a cupboard item into a tiny identity ritual. You are not just buying a drink, you are buying sleep support, calm, clarity, digestion vibes, ritualized wellness, whatever emotional need the blend has been designed to sit beside. Pukka also emphasizes organic standards, purity testing, herbal practitioners, flavor panels, carefully chosen active ingredients, and tea bags made from natural fibers and stitched with organic cotton. On the surface, that all sounds like the opposite of compromise. But the reason I would still skip Pukka more often than not is simple. This is one of the tea brands most likely to convince buyers that sophistication equals necessity. The packaging and language can make a simple hot drink feel like a morally upgraded purchase. And when that happens, the shopper often becomes less critical about the actual value proposition. How much of what you are paying for is ingredient integrity, and how much of it is beautifully managed wellness atmosphere? How much of the trust comes from what is in the bag, and how much comes from what the brand allows you to feel about yourself while holding it? That is not an accusation. It is a consumer math problem. Pukka is very good at turning tea into a narrative of intention. But intention is not always the same thing as clarity. If you love herbal infusions, fine. If you want specific blends, fine. But if you are buying it because the box makes you feel like you are making the obviously superior choice, that is exactly when you should slow down. I would skip Pukka because it is one of the strongest examples of tea becoming lifestyle theater with a premium margin attached. Teapigs takes that same premium shift and gives it a slightly different costume. Here the move is not wellness mystique, it is quality theater built around modern tea culture. Loose leaf quality in every temple, better ingredients, proper flavor. A product ordinary tea bags are implied to be too mediocre to deliver. Even the branding choice matters. Tea temples, not just tea bags. Temples, a word that instantly upgrades the object before the water has even touched it. And to be fair, Teapigs does give the shopper some useful detail. Its English breakfast is described as black tea from Assam, Rwanda, and Ceylon. It openly pushes the idea that you get more for your money buying loose leaf. That honesty is refreshing, but it also accidentally reveals the weakness in the premium tea bag pitch. If you get more for your money going loose leaf, then a big part of the temple experience is convenience wrapped in status. You are paying extra to feel like you did not compromise, even though convenience is still the central format. That is why Teapigs fascinates me. It sells rebellion against ordinary tea while still meeting the buyer right where modern premium branding thrives, in the desire to feel a little more discerning than the next person in the aisle. A stronger bag shape, better copy, nicer design, more whole leaf language. It all works. But once you translate it back into plain shopping logic, the question becomes much simpler. Is this a dramatically clearer buy, or just a more flattering one? I would skip Teapigs because this is where tea becomes self-image. Not medical self-image, not moral self-image, but taste self-image. The kind that whispers, I'm not drinking the basic stuff. And maybe sometimes you are not. But if that identity upgrade costs far more than the improvement in clarity, honesty, or real-world value, then the brand has already won a game the shopper never realized they were playing. The last brand on this list is Whittard, and I saved it for the end because it shows how little information a premium setting sometimes needs to project authority. Whittard is surrounded by all the cues people associate with speciality: quality, polished retail identity, giftable presentation, a long-standing British name, and a sense that if something is sold in a refined tea environment, it must automatically be a better calibrated purchase than supermarket tea. But premium retail staging is not the same as premium consumer disclosure. Take something as basic as English breakfast. On one product page, the information can be remarkably stripped back. Black tea, origin Indonesia, traditional tea bags, rich and multi-identity. That is not nothing. In fact, one could argue the simplicity is refreshing, but it also creates a strange premium contradiction. If the brand environment suggests discernment, why is the underlying explanation sometimes so minimal? Why should a buyer pay specialty-style money for a product page that can still feel lighter on meaningful context than the atmosphere around it? This is one of the easiest traps in the tea category to fall into, because people often confuse curation with transparency. A beautiful shelf is not the same as a clear buying case. A heritage retailer is not a guarantee that each tea offers the depth of sourcing explanation, flavor logic, or value justification a careful shopper might assume is built into the price. Sometimes premium retail simply edits out the mess and sells certainty by aesthetic discipline. And that is why I would skip Whittard if the goal is not tea as a gift or tea as mood, but tea as a high-frequency pantry decision. The more often you buy something, the less you should pay for ambiance. For occasional theater, maybe. For weekly shopping logic, no. So what is the deeper truth tying all 8 of these brands together? It is not that Britain's tea aisle is full of obvious villains. It is that tea is one of the most emotionally protected categories in the supermarket, which means branding has far more room to act like understanding than it does in categories people already distrust. We scrutinize snack bars, we side-eye protein claims, we read yogurt sugar numbers. But tea still sneaks through on emotional credit. Britishness, heritage, calm, wellness, ritual, premium cues, sustainable-sounding language, and the sheer innocence of the category do most of the selling before the leaf has had to defend itself. That is why familiar branding is not enough anymore. Not for a product you consume daily, not for something you buy for the whole household, and not for a category where the differences are often less about dramatic danger and more about whether the box is helping you think clearly or helping you stop thinking altogether. The practical rule I want you to remember is this: when tea branding gets stronger, your questions should get simpler. Where is it from, really? How specific is the origin information? Is the price justified by something concrete, or mostly by identity? Is this a tea product, a wellness story, a heritage story, or a premium convenience story pretending to be all three? If it is decaf, how is it processed? If it is bagged, what is the bag made of? If it sounds local, what part is actually local? If it sounds luxurious, what exactly are you paying for besides mood? That checklist will save you more money than memorizing brand loyalties ever will. Because the smartest tea buyer is not the one who chases the loudest claims. It is the one who notices when a brand's strongest feature is the feeling it creates before the facts have really arrived. And to be clear, skipping these brands does not mean never drinking them again under any circumstance. It means refusing to hand out automatic trust just because a tea box feels culturally safe. It means breaking the reflex. It means treating tea with the same adult scrutiny you would bring to any other repeated purchase in your kitchen. The category counts on you not doing that. That is why doing it matters. If you disagree with any of these, good. That usually means you actually have a reason. Drop the brand you think deserves defending, and tell me why. Or tell me which tea brand in the UK aisle still feels genuinely honest once you strip away the packaging language. And if there is another grocery category people trust way too easily, put that in the comments too, because chances are the next quiet consumer myth is already sitting in somebody's trolley pretending to be obvious.